The bus jolted to a stop, and no one moved to help the old man to his feet. His hands trembled as he reached for his cane, plastic grocery bag rustling in the silence. The driver rolled his eyes. "We're on a schedule, sir." But no one knew who this man really was. Not yet. 5 hours later, half the town would be standing in front of his crumbling house, and a black SUV with government plates would be parked outside. Someone had finally made a phone call. And now, it was too late to stay quiet. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like the video. Every morning at 7:22 a.m., the same bus stopped at the corner of Elm and Turner. And every morning, a thin old man climbed aboard with the same brown cane and the same overstuffed grocery bag swinging from his wrist. No one ever asked his name. The regulars just called him Seat 3B, because that's where he always sat, second row, window side, right behind the yellow strip of warning tape that never stuck properly. It was March. Gray snow still clung to the curbside. The air smelled like salt and thawing pavement. The old man boarded without a word. His hands shook, but his eyes were sharp. He wore a worn gray windbreaker zipped to the neck, the fabric stretched tight across his narrow shoulders. A faded ball cap with no logo shaded his face. No one offered him help. They never did. Kids in the back snickered. "Yo, Seat 3BS back at it again," one of them whispered, not so quietly. "He's probably got World War I in that bag," another laughed. "Bet he's never even left this town." The driver, a man named Keith who'd been behind the wheel for 5 years, gave the old man a nod that was more habit than kindness. "Running late, sir," he muttered. "If you could move a little quicker." The old man didn't answer. He just made his way down the narrow aisle, the cane tapping in steady rhythm, and slid into 3B like he always did. At the next stop, a middle-aged woman with a Bluetooth headset and perfectly ironed blouse got on. She scowled when she saw 3B occupied. "Seriously," she muttered. "He always takes the handicap seat. Some people actually need it." No one said anything. The old man stared out the window, eyes tracking the slow rise of the sun over the strip mall parking lot. He didn't react when a teenager accidentally bumped his cane. He didn't flinch when the woman dropped her oversized purse on his foot. He just breathed. In, out, in, out. Like he'd practiced that kind of silence his whole life. The bus continued through town, past shuttered storefronts and graffiti-tagged benches. A man like him should have blended in. But something about his stillness, it was too controlled. Like he was listening for something no one else could hear. At 8:06, the bus pulled up near the Department of Veterans Affairs Clinic. The old man didn't move. "Your stop," Keith called. Still nothing. "Sir." He turned slowly. "Not today." His voice was barely louder than a whisper, but the way he said it made the driver blink. Like there was something final in it. The woman beside him scoffed. "Maybe tomorrow you'll remember your appointment." The bus rolled on. Kids filed off at the high school. The woman got off near the business park, still grumbling. The man in seat 3B remained, staring out the window. Only one rider noticed what happened next. A young girl in a red hoodie sitting across the aisle. She watched as the old man's hand slipped into his jacket, pulling out a worn photograph. 5 men in combat uniforms. 2 had XS drawn over their faces in shaky black pen. She didn't understand what it meant, but she stared, long and hard. By the time she looked up again, the man had tucked the photo away. He was gripping his cane so hard, his knuckles had turned white. Comment bait embedded. Have you ever misjudged someone, only to realize later they carried more strength than you imagined? How did that change you? The bus hissed to a stop near the rundown supermarket on the edge of town. The old man stood, slowly, painfully, and walked off without looking back. No one noticed that his gait was perfect. Not for someone with a limp, but for someone trained to move without being seen. And no one noticed that the photo he held wasn't just old, it was classified. The house didn't look like it was still standing. Peeling gray paint curled off the siding like old bark. A plastic tarp flapped off one side of the roof, held in place by cinder blocks. One of the porch steps had split clean through, forcing visitors to jump awkwardly onto the porch. Not that there were ever any visitors. The mailbox said J. Holloway. No name. No welcome mat. Just a rusty screen door that squealed every time it was opened, and the faint smell of oil and cedar emanating from the wood. It was the kind of place you passed by without noticing. The kind of house the city forgot. Mr. Holloway had returned from the grocery store that morning with a bag of beans and rice and a single apple. He didn't need much. He rarely ate more than twice a day. Habit. Discipline. He put the bag on the counter, turned off the small radio, it only ever listened to static anyway, and walked into the hallway where a thin wall calendar hung, crooked but legible. March 14th was written on it, a single word in small block letters, deliver. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he went into the back room. It was the only room in the house that didn't creak. The walls were lined with boxes, each labeled with a year. In the corner was a metal filing cabinet, the top drawer locked. He leaned over and pulled out a cardboard box labeled 2007 to 2010. Inside were envelopes, all sealed. The addresses were handwritten so carefully they looked like they had been drawn with a ruler. He picked one out. He carried it into the kitchen, set it on the table, and sat down. His hands rested at his sides. He didn't open it. He just stared, as if waiting for a memory to rise from the paper and speak first. A car engine rumbled outside. Then another. 3 neighborhood kids passed the house on their way home from school. "This is the place, isn't it?" one whispered. "Yeah, weird. My cousin said he saw a camera in the mailbox. This guy's like an ex-FBI agent or something. Or a hoarder." They paused at the edge of the lawn, eyeing the broken porch with the kind of curiosity that only children and thieves can display. Then one of them threw a rock. It hit the siding and fell with a thud. No movement from inside. But he didn't even notice. They laughed as they walked away. But inside, Holloway noticed. He always did. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but the vibrations were different. The tremors in the floorboards. The rattling of the air. He didn't move. Just closed his eyes. And counted. 1, 2, 3. Then he slowly opened the drawer on the left and pulled out a velvet pouch. From it he took out an old brass army dog tag. The letters were faded, but they were there. He held it in his palm for a long moment. Then, with practiced precision, he placed it next to the envelope. Across town, a clerk in the county office tapped her keyboard and frowned. "That's odd," she muttered. "That guy on Quayle Street. He's not in the system." "Who?" She turned the monitor toward her colleague. "J. Holloway. His house is listed, but there's no record. No tax returns. No military benefits. No driver's license. He just exists. But only on paper." The colleague leaned over, squinting. "Maybe it's a pseudonym." "I thought so, too. But then what's the real address for?" They looked at each other. Anxiety passed between them. And then they both did what people often do when they're faced with something they can't explain. They rolled up the window. Back inside, Holloway stood slowly and walked to the wall where the old rotary phone hung. He picked it up, dialed 7 digits from memory, and waited. No one answered. He didn't leave a message. But somewhere, over the state line, in a government building with no sign, an alarm began to blink on a dark screen. A red tag that read, "Holloway, status check. If you think respect shouldn't wear out over time, type respect." No sirens sounded. No alarm sounded. Just a quiet change in a quiet system. And yet no one in town had the slightest idea who the man in 3B's seat really was. But they were going to find out. Keith had been driving the Route 9 line for half a decade, and in that time, he'd seen it all: kids tagging seats with Sharpies, teenagers vaping behind hooded jackets, old ladies starting fistfights over forgotten purses. But none of it stuck with him the way the man in seat 3B did. That morning, Keith stood in the break room of the transit depot, pouring weak coffee into a paper cup, his brow furrowed. "You okay, man?" asked Josh, one of the newer drivers. Keith didn't answer right away. He stirred in powdered creamer, eyes distant. "That old guy, Holloway. He didn't get off at the clinic today." Josh blinked. "So?" "He always gets off at the clinic. Same time, same seat. Today he just said, not today." Josh shrugged. "Maybe he forgot." Keith sipped. "He doesn't forget." Josh smirked. "You think he's CIA or something?" Keith didn't smile. "I think he's something." That same afternoon, the VA clinic called the town hall. "We had a no-show for scheduled check-in. John Holloway. We're required to log a welfare notice if a registered patient misses 2 appointments without explanation. Did you try calling him? No phone on file. No email. Just a P.O. box and a date of birth that hasn't been verified since '86. The clerk paused. "Okay. I'll send someone by." But she didn't. Because paperwork piles up and quiet people slip through cracks. Meanwhile, in the back room of a dim corner diner called Ruth's Kitchen, a man named Carl sat hunched over his 3rd slice of lemon pie. Carl was the town's unofficial historian, meaning he spent most of his time reading obituaries and arguing with himself. But today he held something different in his hands. A photo. Old. Faded. Bent at the corners. It showed 5 men standing in front of a helicopter. Smiling. tired, armed. One of them, center left, wore a ball cap with no logo. Carl flipped the photo over. A single line of handwriting. Da Nang, 1971, JH. He turned to Ruth, the diner's owner. You recognize this guy? She squinted. Seat 3B. Carl nodded slowly. Where'd you get that? Someone slid it under my door this morning. Why? I think someone wants us to remember something we forgot. Back at the Holloway house, the mailbox was full. Letters unsent. No stamps. Just names. At 5:46 p.m., Holloway stepped outside. The sky had turned a dull peach. He stood for a long moment, then took a knee beside the rose bush he hadn't trimmed since last spring. He wasn't gardening. He was digging. 2 feet down, wrapped in oilcloth, he uncovered a small metal case. The locks were rusted. He didn't bother with a key. A flathead screwdriver did the job. Inside, a leather-bound notebook, a military patch, and a folded flag with 5 names stitched inside the hem. Holloway placed the flag on his lap. Then, slowly, he reached for the phone again. 7 digits. 1 ring. 2. Click. This time, someone answered. A voice on the other end simply said, "Sir." And Holloway replied, "Time's up." Across town, Keith sat in his car in the depot parking lot. He was staring at something on the passenger seat. The grocery bag. He hadn't noticed it until he finished his route. Seat 3B had left it behind. Inside, a small, framed photo. The same 5 men Carl had seen earlier. And beneath it, folded so tightly it could have been missed, a letter. Addressed to those who forget who I was, thank you. It kept you safe. Keith blinked, then started his engine. He was going back. But Holloway was already gone. What would you do if your mother was disrespected like this? If you believe respecting those who sacrificed is the minimum we owe them, type never forget in the comments. By midnight, 6 phone calls had been placed to numbers no longer listed. 3 were answered. And on a secure line at an Air National Guard station 2 states away, a retired lieutenant colonel stood up from his desk. God help us, he whispered. Someone woke Holloway. It was 2:17 a.m. when someone tried to access the Department of Defense archives from a terminal in Northern Virginia. Not just any archives, Tier 7, restricted. The kind of files that don't exist unless you already know where to look. 3 minutes later, a call was placed to a retired analyst named Marcus Lane. The voice on the line said, "We have a Holloway activation." Lane sat up in bed. Which Holloway? The voice replied, Echo operative. Vietnam era. Disavowed in 82. Lane didn't move for a moment. That file's supposed to be buried. The voice didn't argue. It just blinked. Lane got dressed in silence. In town, dawn was still 2 hours away. But the house on Quayle Street was already stirring. The porch light, which hadn't worked in over a decade, flickered on. Inside, Holloway stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of a faded olive shirt. It wasn't military issue anymore. No insignia, no stripes. But it was pressed. Deliberate. Ritualistic. He opened the closet and reached for a small wooden box. Inside, a patch bearing the letters JSC. He looked at it for a long time, then shut the box. By 7 a.m., word had spread across town. Something strange had happened at the transit depot. Keith hadn't shown up for his shift. Instead, he left a note taped to his locker. Check the bag. Find Carl. Ask about 71. No one knew what it meant. But by 9 a.m., Ruth's diner had a line out the door. Not for food, but because Carl had pinned the photo of Holloway on the wall next to the register. Beneath it, a napkin with 6 words scrawled in permanent marker. He's not who you think he is. People asked questions. Carl didn't answer them. Instead, he opened an old filing cabinet in the back corner of the diner and pulled out a folder. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, black and white photos, and 1 declassified memo from 1993. Subject, J. Holloway, Echo Unit. Special assignment terminated. Individual is not to be contacted under any circumstance without direct authorization from Washington. If subject reactivates, initiate protocol tercio. He is not a civilian. He is not retired. He is operational. That same day, a black SUV pulled into the town's only motel. The man who stepped out wore a dark suit and earpiece. He didn't check in. He didn't speak. He walked straight to the front desk, placed a file folder down, and said only, "Where's the bus depot?" The clerk pointed down the road. "What's this about?" The man smiled slightly. Routine follow-up. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. Meanwhile, Holloway was standing at the edge of a field just outside town. He hadn't been there in years. It used to be a training site, back when it wasn't listed on any map. He reached down and dug his fingers into the soil. Cold. Familiar. The ground remembered. He whispered to the earth. Not words. Names. Then he stood, shoulders back, chin high, and walked back toward town. At 10:34 a.m., Ruth turned to Carl and whispered, "You need to tell them who he is." Carl shook his head. They wouldn't believe it. "You didn't either," she said quietly, until the file turned up. Carl nodded. "Yeah, but now the question is." He turned and looked out the window. "Why is he back? If you believe those who sacrificed for others deserve to be honored every day, subscribe to us, where we tell the stories that should have been appreciated long ago. Because quiet heroes never stop serving." Back in D.C., Marcus Lane stared at the blinking red light on his secure terminal. He picked up the phone. "Activate Echo Flag." "You sure?" Lane nodded. "He warned us. If he ever resurfaced, it meant something was already broken." At exactly 11:03 a.m., the bells at St. Adelaide's rang out 3 times. No one noticed, except Holloway. He was sitting in the town square now, a folded newspaper on his lap, untouched. His eyes tracked a flock of starlings cutting across the sky. Predictable pattern. Unpredictable direction. Just like people. 2 teenagers walked by, laughing too loud. One of them paused. Hey, isn't that the guy from the bus?" His friend shrugged. "He looks like he's been sitting there since Nam." Neither of them knew how close they were to the truth. Inside Ruth's diner, the morning rush had faded. Carl leaned over the counter with a worn folder, whispering to Ruth, "You know the name Monroe?" She frowned. "Monroe? Like the hardware store?" Carl shook his head. "Captain Monroe. Vietnam. Echo Recon." Ruth went still. "That name's in the folder?" she asked. Carl slid a black and white photo toward her. In it, 5 soldiers posed beside a downed helicopter. One of them was bleeding from the leg. Another held a pistol in one hand and a cigarette in the other. And in the middle stood a younger Holloway, arm around Monroe. Expression unreadable. "Look at the patch on his shoulder," Carl whispered. It wasn't Army. It wasn't Navy. It was something else. By noon, people started whispering. Not openly, not yet, but the edges were curling. Keith hadn't come home. The black SUV had circled the block 4 times. And someone, no one knew who, had placed an envelope under the town hall door marked Archive Request. Holloway. The clerk who opened it didn't speak. She just took her break early. At 12:26 p.m., a group of men stood outside the square, watching Holloway. Businessmen, 2 local officials, and one unfamiliar face in a tailored coat that didn't fit the season. "Do you think he remembers?" one of them asked quietly. The man in the coat answered, "He remembers everything. That's the problem. What should we do?" He lit a cigarette. "Hope he keeps sitting." They didn't realize Holloway could hear every word. Down the street, in a windowless office behind the local paper, a reporter named Allison clicked through old archives. Her editor had shrugged when she pitched the story. "Old man on a bus. You're wasting your time." But Allison had seen the napkin at Ruth's, had read the name Echo Unit in Carl's folder. She searched until her fingers ached. And then she found it. 1975, Echo Recon Team confirmed in covert operation, Da Nang Province. Mission classified. 5-man team. Monroe, Kessler, Davins, Torres, and operative only listed as JH. She sat back slowly. The article had a single quote, buried in the last paragraph. From a debriefing officer. The 5th man moved like wind. Silent. Effective. One of ours, but deeper. He's not listed for your protection. Allison exhaled. She knew who JH was. If this makes you angry, type respect in the comments. At 3:10 p.m., Holloway stood from the bench and began walking. He didn't go fast. He didn't need to. People moved out of his way, even those who didn't know why. He passed the hardware store, the library, the memorial. He paused. His fingers brushed the bronze names on the wall, etched in rows. For names that matched the men from the photos. He didn't weep. He just stood there, jaw tight, hand resting on the stone. A boy nearby asked his mother, "Who is he?" His mother hesitated, then answered honestly, "I don't know, but I think we're about to." By sunset, a second black SUV arrived, and Holloway's front door creaked open for the first time in 5 years. At 6:17 p.m., The first SUV pulled into the cracked driveway on Quail Street. 5 men stepped out. None of them wore uniforms, but every one of them moved like they once did. They didn't knock. The door was already open. Inside, Holloway sat in the same chair he'd used for 30 years. He didn't rise when they entered. He didn't need to. The first man, gray at the temples, jaw like stone, nodded once. "John," Holloway replied. "Colonel." No other words were spoken for a while. Then the man stepped forward and set a black duffel on the kitchen table. It landed with a dull metallic thud. From inside, he pulled a sealed folder. Official. Unlabeled. "You're compromised," he said quietly. Holloway didn't look surprised. Was wondering when they'd stop pretending. The colonel nodded. "Too many people know now. Your presence alone, your survival, is considered a security breach. You came to shut me down? We came to warn you. And to ask one question." Holloway tilted his head. "And what made you surface?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the old photo on the wall, the 5 men beside the helicopter. "3 of them have kids," he said. "One of those kids just got threatened online for wearing his father's patch." The colonel went still. "You think I'm hiding?" Holloway continued. "I was retired. But you don't let a house burn when you still have water in the well." At 7:02 p.m., Ruth's diner went silent. A black sedan pulled up, and from it stepped a man in full marine dress blues. Clean. Impeccable. His chest bore 3 rows of ribbons, but his expression was storm-level serious. He walked to the counter and spoke to Ruth. "I need to see the file Carl showed you." Ruth hesitated. "You military?" "Retired. Son of Captain Monroe." Everyone in the room froze. Carl emerged from the back, holding the folder. The officer flipped through it in silence. Then, softly, he said, "My father always told me about a man who dragged him through gunfire and disappeared before the chopper landed." He tapped the photo. "This is him." Ruth nodded. He swallowed hard. "My father spent the rest of his life looking for him." "Why?" The officer looked up. "Because he owed him everything." That night, as Holloway watched from his window, the second SUV finally parked across the street. But this one was different. It wasn't black. It was navy blue, and it bore the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs. 2 men in suits stepped out. Not agents. Messengers. One carried a silver box. The other carried a clipboard. They approached slowly, no rush in their steps. When Holloway opened the door, the man with the box offered a silent nod. "We're here on behalf of the secretary." "Didn't ask for anything," Holloway replied. "You didn't have to." He opened the box. Inside, a flag. Folded. Framed. And beneath it, a single line etched in brass. "To John Holloway, the silent shield of others." The man with the clipboard spoke next. "Sir, your full benefits have been reactivated. You've been granted clearance for a ceremonial recognition. All previous restrictions have been lifted." "I don't need recognition." The man hesitated. "Then maybe this is for them." He handed over a list. 38 names. Children. Siblings. Spouses. All connected to missions Holloway had never spoken of. People who never knew who saved their family. Now they would. Justice may delay, but it is never absent. Don't give up when you're doing what's right. When have you stood firm while the world stood against you? Share your story now. By morning, the story had broken wide. Photos appeared online. The man from seat 3B. The grocery bag. The bench. People who once mocked him now shared grainy clips with hashtags like #SilentEcho and #HollowayIsReal. But Holloway? He was already walking toward the bus stop. Same cane. Same seat. Different eyes watching now. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the bus stopped at Elm and Turner. Holloway boarded like always. Only this time, no one laughed. No one muttered about seat 3B. The teenagers sat quietly. The woman with the Bluetooth headset offered him the seat with a nod. And Keith, back behind the wheel, said, "Morning, sir." Not sir, as in politeness, but sir, as in recognition. The bus rolled forward. At the stop near the clinic, Holloway didn't get off. He stayed seated, eyes locked on the horizon. At the town square, he stood. Everyone stood with him. The benches around the Veterans Memorial were already full. Someone had brought folding chairs. Someone else had set up a small speaker and microphone, though no one expected him to use it. He didn't. He walked up to the wall of names, placed one gloved hand on the brass, and stood still. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "I served with Monroe." If Holloway says something matters, then it matters. Heads turned. The speaker was older, his voice raspy with years. He stepped forward, removing a faded hat. I've waited decades to see him again. Another man followed. Then a woman. One by one, strangers in the crowd came forward with fragments, stories about friends who never came home, rumors about a fifth operative, whispers about a shadow who appeared when no one else could. A boy stepped forward holding a sketchpad. He'd drawn Holloway sitting in seat 3B, the photo from his lap in perfect pencil detail. My granddad said men like you don't ask for thanks, he said softly. So this is mine. He handed it over. Holloway took the drawing. Didn't smile. Didn't cry. But he did something no one had ever seen. He bowed his head. That moment rippled outward. People lowered their phones. The crowd quieted. A silence fell over the square, not awkward, but sacred. Then Keith, the bus driver, stepped forward and cleared his throat. I found something in that grocery bag, he said. A list. He unfolded a paper. Read. Names of those I couldn't save. Names of those I did. Names I've never spoken, because the mission was always louder than the memory. Keith looked up, and at the bottom, one last line. He turned the paper toward the crowd. If I stayed silent, it was only to keep others safe. I never stopped carrying them. Have you known someone like that? Someone who carries others quietly, without asking for thanks? Share their story, because even when the world forgets, we remember. Subscribe to us for more stories that still matter. No ceremony followed. No speech. But people began lining up, quietly, to place things at the base of the memorial. A coin, a ribbon, a child's drawing. And finally, Carl from the diner placed the original napkin with 6 words. He's not who you think he is. Then he took a marker and added. He's more. That afternoon, a letter arrived at Town Hall. No return address. Inside, a single page. Typed, to the town that forgot me, thank you. It gave me peace. To those who now remember, honor that memory not with parades, but with action. Help someone who doesn't ask. Stand for someone who stands alone. Speak when silence feels safer. That's how you carry the echo. It wasn't signed, but the clerk recognized the handwriting. She pinned it to the community board under one word. Holloway. They say some people leave without warning. But that morning, everyone in town somehow knew Holloway was gone. Not because anyone saw him leave. Not because the news announced it. But because the bus pulled up at 7:22 a.m., and when Keith opened the door, the air felt wrong. Seat 3B was empty. No cane tapping down the aisle. No silent nod. No folded grocery bag. Just sunlight pooling on cracked vinyl. Ruth was the first to hear it. She stood by the window at the diner, holding a pot of fresh coffee in both hands. A silence pressed against the glass. Across the street, Carl slowly emerged from his shop, holding a photograph. He didn't say a word. He just turned it over, revealing the signature on the back. JH? Below it, one final note in delicate, careful script. If you're reading this, I've gone dark again. Not for war. Not for duty. For rest. At the town hall, the clerk found the deed to the house on Quayle Street sitting on her desk. Signed over. To the town. Attached was a single line, handwritten in perfect block letters. Use it for someone who has nowhere else to go. The house was inspected the next day. Everything inside was gone. Cleaned. Sorted. Left with intention. All except one room, sealed with a brass lock. Inside, only a chair, a desk, a battered green notebook, and a small American flag folded so tight it looked like it might still breathe if someone listened close enough. On the final page of the notebook. I didn't serve to be remembered. I served so you could forget there was danger at all. C3B was never about me. It's for the ones who ride quietly beside you every day, carrying things no one can see. If you sit there, listen, you may hear someone who never stopped watching. That weekend, the mayor called an emergency council meeting. By unanimous vote, March 14th was declared John Holloway Day. No parades. No speeches. Instead, the town published a challenge in the local paper. Perform one act of silent service. Don't post it. Don't explain it. Just carry it. The response was overwhelming. Groceries appeared on porches. Letters showed up in veterans' mailboxes with no return address. A disabled widow's ramp was repaired overnight. And at the bus stop on Elm and Turner, someone painted 3 quiet words across the sidewalk in clean white block letters. He rode with us. The Department of Defense sent a single representative in a black sedan. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't file a report. He simply walked into Ruth's diner, nodded at the wall where Holloway's picture now hung, and left a silver coin beneath it. Carl turned it over when he thought no one was looking. It bore no date, no seal, just 3 letters. Siege. If it moved you to, type respect. Months passed. The world moved on. But something in town had changed. People walked slower past seat 3B. They tipped their hats to the bench at the square. And every year on March 14th, the old house on Quail Street lit a single porch light, automated, now set to turn on at exactly 7:22 a.m. Some say they've seen a shadow standing in the doorway. Some say they haven't. But no one questions the light. Not anymore. One late summer evening, Keith finished his route and pulled the bus into the depot. He lingered in his seat for a long time, then walked to the back, opened the maintenance panel near seat 3B, and tucked something inside. It was the boy's drawing, the one Holloway had carried. He taped it flat against the metal wall, then closed the panel and whispered, "Still riding with us, aren't you?" Across the country, the name John Holloway began appearing in the most unexpected places. On plaques, on corners of classrooms, on forgotten documents quietly reclassified. But the story was never about fame. It was about something much quieter. A man who carried others so well, even silence couldn't forget him. And so the seat remains. Second row, window side, seat 3B, reserved not for one man, but for every quiet protector who never asked for thanks. Only to keep going. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let YouTube promote stories of kindness.